Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everybody. Today we're going to be diving into something a little different. We're cracking open Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power. Now, I know, the title, it sounds a bit, a bit like a villain's handbook, right?
Right, a little bit Machiavellian.
Exactly. But stick with us. It's actually full of really insightful stuff about navigating power dynamics, and that's something that's relevant to everyone.
Absolutely.
And Greene, he uses these captivating historical examples. It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
And useful, too. It's not just about, conquering empires, but also those everyday power plays that we all encounter.
It's true. Greene's work, it can seem a bit dramatic, I'll grant you that.
Sure, sure.
But at its core, it's really about understanding human nature, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
And how that plays out in the quest for power.
Yeah.
And that's something that never goes out of style.
No, it really doesn't.
Yeah.
So let's just jump right into it, shall we? Law number 1.
Yeah.
Never outshine the master. So Greene, he shares this very interesting story, right, about Nicolas Fouquet. This guy was finance minister to Louis XIV, the Sun King.
Wow.
And Fouquet, he throws this lavish party. I mean, we're talking over-the-top extravagance.
Oh, I bet.
And the whole point was to impress the king, right, to curry favor.
Right, makes sense.
But instead of being impressed, Louis throws Fouquet in prison.
What? Really?
Yeah.
Well, I guess Louis XIV wasn't exactly known for his humility.
No, not really.
Sounds like he saw that extravagance as a direct threat to his own power, you know?
It's wild, right? I mean, Fouquet thought he was being a good servant, throwing this big party, but it backfires spectacularly.
It just goes to show sometimes good intentions, they don't always equal good outcomes.
Right.
Especially when you're dealing with powerful people. It often boils down to perception, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Even the slightest hint that you might be outshining them, that can be enough to trigger a very negative reaction.
So it's not enough to just be competent,
Right.
right? You have to manage how that competence is perceived,
Exactly.
especially by those in positions of authority.
It's such a delicate dance. On the one hand, you want to demonstrate your abilities to show your worth, but on the other, you don't want to make anyone in a higher position feel, threatened.
It really makes you think twice about that victory lap around the office, doesn't it?
Right.
So how do we avoid this? How do we avoid accidentally outshining the master? Does Greene offer any solutions?
He does. And get this, one of the strategies he suggests is actually quite counterintuitive.
Oh.
It's Law 16. He calls it, use absence to increase respect and honor. He uses the example of Deioces, this judge in ancient media.
Okay.
Deioces, at the height of his influence, he actually steps back from his role. He makes himself scarce.
Wait a minute. You're telling me that he made himself scarce to actually become more important?
It does sound a bit backwards, doesn't it?
It's like the exact opposite of that whole there's no such thing as bad publicity idea. Like P.T. Barnum, right?
You've hit on a crucial point.
Yeah.
Context is everything.
Okay.
Barnum, he was just starting out. He needed that constant attention.
Sure. To build his brand.
Exactly. Deioces, on the other hand, he was already established. So by withdrawing, by creating the sense of absence, people began to realize just how much they relied on his judgment, you see.
So it's not about disappearing entirely, but rather choosing when and how to make your presence felt.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that both absence and presence, they can be powerful tools.
It all depends on how you wield them.
Exactly.
This is already making me rethink how I approach, pretty much every situation.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked about not outshining the master and using absence strategically.
Right.
What other kind of power plays does Greene have up his sleeve?
Well, he also delves into this fascinating cluster of laws, specifically 34, 36, and 38. And they all revolve around this idea of strategic imperfection.
Strategic imperfection. Okay, that sounds like a complete paradox. What's that all about?
Well, it's this idea that, you know how we said that appearing too competent can work against you?
Right.
Well, appearing too perfect, it can actually backfire as well.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this strategic imperfection.
So Greene, he gives the example of King Louis Philippe.
Okay.
He was known as the citizen king, and he really leaned into that image. Dressed simply, carried an umbrella, that sort of thing. Tried to appear incredibly relatable.
Oh, I see.
The problem was it came off as inauthentic, almost like a caricature of, the common man. And ultimately, it backfired. He ended up losing his crown.
So it's like a balancing act.
Exactly.
While appearing too superior, like we said, dangerous. But appearing overly relatable, That can backfire too.
Precisely. Authenticity is important, but so is a degree of mystique. Think about it. If a leader appears too perfect, it creates this distance.
Yeah.
It makes them seem almost inhuman. And people, well, they start to resent that unattainable perfection.
Makes sense. So where's the sweet spot? How do you strike that balance between being relatable and maintaining that sense of authority?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is.
Then it's something Greene explores in depth. One great example he gives, it involves Michelangelo. Did you know he intentionally left a flaw in the Sistine Chapel ceiling?
No, really. Why on earth would he do that?
It was a calculated risk. You see, Michelangelo, he was locked in this bitter rivalry with Bramante, another artist. They were both vying for the Pope's favor.
Ah, I see.
So by intentionally leaving this minor flaw in his work, Michelangelo knew that Bramante, being who he was, would jump at the chance to point it out to the Pope, right?
Oh, sneaky. Who did he?
He did, but the Pope, he saw right through it. He recognized that the flaw was insignificant compared to the overall majesty of the work.
Wow.
And of course, that backfired on Bramante spectacularly, solidified Michelangelo's position as the superior artist.
That's incredible. Talk about understanding human psychology.
It's all about strategy, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
And speaking of strategy, this ties in beautifully with another key theme Greene explores: disguising your hand and appealing to self-interest. It really is. It's about, making those in power, those you need help from. It's about making them think it was their idea all along.
Oh, I see. So you're not just like, going in there with demands.
Yeah.
It's more subtle, more strategic.
Exactly. Greene has this great example. It involves Joseph Duveen, the art dealer.
Yeah.
So Duveen, he was determined to get Andrew Mellon, this incredibly wealthy banker, as a client.
Okay, makes sense.
But instead of, just bombarding the guy with offers, Duveen took a more roundabout way.
Interesting. How so?
He did his homework, learned everything he could about Mellon's taste in art, what he liked, what he didn't like.
So it's kind of like strategic flattery?
You could say that, because when Mellon finally visited Duveen's gallery, he was blown away.
Really?
It was like Duveen had curated the entire collection just for him, which in a way he kind of had.
Wow, that's really savvy.
It is. And of course, Mellon, he felt seen, understood. And he ended up becoming one of Duveen's most important clients.
It's amazing how powerful that feeling of being understood can be. It's like when you feel like someone really gets you, you're much more likely to, want to work with them, to trust their judgment.
It's human nature. And it contrasts sharply with, those people who just barge in, giving unsolicited advice, completely missing the mark.
Oh, tell me about it.
In fact, Greene actually shares this rather cautionary tale about this. Laws 13 and 19, I believe. It's about this engineer, and this guy, he tries to give advice to a Roman consul about the size of his battering rams.
Oh, no. This can't be good.
It doesn't end well, no.
Yeah.
The engineer, he thinks he's being helpful, but the consul, well, he sees it as this challenge to his authority. Like, he doesn't know what he's doing.
Oh, boy.
The poor engineer, he ends up executed.
No way.
Yes.
Talk about a harsh lesson in knowing your audience.
Right, reading the room.
Mm-hmm.
Or in this case, reading the consul. It really highlights just how important it is to be aware of the power dynamics at play. It's not always about brute force, is it?
Right.
It's about finesse, strategy, and as we've been saying, really understanding, human psychology.
It's all connected.
It is. Which brings us to another really fascinating law. Law 39, stir up waters to catch fish.
Stir up waters to catch fish. Okay, that sounds a bit more, but more aggressive than appealing to someone's self-interest.
Right.
What's the thinking behind this one?
So this law, it's about strategically using emotion, particularly when you're dealing with, opponents, rivals.
Okay, I see. You're saying it's about staying calm yourself,
Right.
and using your opponent's emotional volatility against them.
Exactly. No, it's not about being manipulative. It's about recognizing opportunities when they present themselves. Greene actually uses the example of Harry Houdini.
Oh, wow. Okay, the escape artist.
Exactly. Houdini, he was famous for being so composed under pressure, and that served him well, especially when he was dealing with rivals.
Yeah, I bet. Did Greene give any specific examples?
He did. He tells this great story about Houdini and his rivalry with another escape artist, a guy named Clapini.
Okay.
So Houdini, being the master strategist that he was, he deliberately let Clopini steal the combination to a pair of handcuffs.
Oh, no, he didn't.
He did. Of course, Clopini, he thinks he's got the upper hand now, right?
Right.
Can't wait to expose Houdini in front of a live
Mud
audience.
is cold.
It is. But of course, Houdini, he still manages to escape, much to Clopini's humiliation.
I bet.
But the point is, Houdini, he knew exactly what he was doing. He understood that by giving Clopini that false sense of victory, he was actually setting him up for a much bigger fall.
Wow.
He used Clopini's own emotions against him.
Brilliant. And, a little bit sneaky,
Oh,
but brilliant. It just goes to show you how much our emotions, they can really cloud our judgment, even when we think we're being clever.
absolutely. And speaking of clever, we can't forget Law 31. Control the options. Get others to play with the cards you deal.
Okay, now that sounds like something straight out of, like, a spy thriller.
It does.
So how does this playing with the cards thing, how does that actually work?
So it's about framing those choices in a way that benefits you.
Cool.
Even if the options themselves, they seem kind of bad to the other person, right? It's about limiting their choices, but making them think they still have free will.
Oh, that's devious.
It can be. Greene talks about Ivan the Terrible. Infamous Russian Tsar.
Oh, yeah?
He was a master of this.
Right.
Oh, yeah. So Greene explains how Ivan, he abdicated his throne, right?
Okay.
But he did it strategically. You see, he knew that the boyars, they're the Russian nobility, they would freak out without him in charge.
Oh, I bet. So used to him running things.
Exactly. And that's exactly what happened. They begged him to come back.
No way.
Oh, yeah. They handed him even more power than before.
Wow. So he created a problem, then he swooped in with the solution.
Exactly. He controlled the options, made him feel like they had no other choice. It's powerful stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a little ruthless. I got to be honest.
It can be. It can be. And that's important to remember. Just because you have knowledge of these laws doesn't mean you should use them to become, Ivan the Terrible.
Right. Not all of us are aspiring tyrants.
Yeah.
Are there any examples of this law, this control the options law, but, used in a less Machiavellian way?
Definitely. Greene gives this great example. It's about a courtesan, Ninon de l'Enclos.
Okay.
This woman, she was incredible, navigating the power dynamics of 17th century France. Really something.
I bet. What did she do?
So instead of, just demanding payment for her companionship, which was, the norm for courtesans back then,
Right.
Ninon, she offered her suitors a choice.
Okay.
They could either pay a huge sum for her time, or they could become part of her inner circle, like her admirers, with no financial obligation.
Wow. She gave them a choice, but both choices, they kind of served her interests in the end.
Exactly. Brilliant, isn't it?
That is really clever.
It is. She understood that by offering that illusion of choice, she actually gained more control.
It's amazing, these stories. You really start to see how these power dynamics, they've played out throughout history,
Are timeless.
and how relevant they still are today.
That's the thing about Greene's work. He's not just presenting a list of rules, right?
Right.
He's really making us think about human behavior.
Yeah. The psychology of power and how we navigate these dynamics.
Exactly. And hopefully how we navigate them with integrity.
Yes, absolutely. It's been really eye-opening. So as we kind of wrap things up here, our deep dive into the 48 laws of power, any final thoughts for our listeners?
Well, we've covered so much, haven't we?
We have.
From the importance of perception to that power of strategic absence, even that art of calculated imperfection.
It's a lot to digest.
It is. But I think the most important takeaway is this. Knowledge is power, but only when it's used wisely, right? So, as you're going about your life, remember, these laws, they're not about manipulation. They're not about controlling others. They're about awareness.
Right.
They're about understanding what motivates people.
I like that.
And if you use that knowledge ethically, well, I really believe it can be a real asset.
Couldn't agree more. Well said. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. It's been a pleasure picking your brain. And to our listeners, as always, thank you for joining us. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a new and fascinating topic. Until then, keep those minds curious.